Today, we're going to take an in-depth look at a fascinating coin from the late 1970s, the 1979 D1 cent coin. You might think this coin is just another penny, but it has a story, a history, and some surprising value that might make you look at it a bit differently. We'll explore its history, how it was minted, and whether your 1979 D penny might be worth more than just a cent. So, let's dive in. Let's begin by setting the stage in 1979. It was a pivotal year in both the US and world history. The economy was still reeling from the 1970s oil crisis, and the US was adjusting to rising inflation rates. In politics, Jimmy Carter was the president, and the country was dealing with a number of social and economic challenges. Meanwhile, in pop culture, the 80s were just around the corner, with disco music still alive, and iconic movies like Alien and Apocalypse now hitting theaters. Show a 1979 D penny as a coin being placed on top of an old newspaper from that year. Asterisk amidst all of this, the US Mint was busy producing the humble 1-cent coin. Specifically, the 1979 D1 cent coin, which was struck at the Denver Mint. The D indicates the mint where it was produced, and in 1979, the Denver Mint was working at full capacity to supply the country with coins during a time of high inflation and growing demand for currency. Now, let's take a closer look at the design and composition of the 1979 D penny. On the obverse, you'll see the iconic image of President Abraham Lincoln, which has appeared on the 1-cent coin since 1909. This design, created by artist Victor David Brenner, is one of the most recognized coin designs in U.S. history. On the reverse side, we see the famous Lincoln Memorial, designed by Frank Gasparo. This design has been used on the penny since 1959 and remained the standard until 2009, when it was replaced by a new reverse featuring the Union Shield. In terms of composition, the 1979 D penny was made of 95% copper and 5% zinc, the same as most pennies struck from the early 20th century until the switch in 1982. The copper content of these coins is significant, especially in comparison to the copper-plated zinc pennies that would follow after the 1982 transition. To understand the value of the 1979 D penny in context, let's take a quick look at the economy. In 1979, the US was experiencing high inflation, which meant that the purchasing power of the penny was still somewhat higher than it is today. A penny in 1979 could buy you a small piece of candy, a stamp, or a few other minor goods. But by the end of the 1970s, things were already beginning to change. Show a comparison of prices from 1979 to today, such as the cost of a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk. Asterisk by today's standards, however, that same penny can barely buy anything. Inflation over the last few decades has led to the penny losing most of its purchasing power. But in 1979, that penny was still used frequently in everyday transactions. Now, let's talk about what makes the 1979 D penny stand out. At first glance, it may just look like any other penny in your jar, but there are a few things that could make it more valuable than just 1 cent. First, the condition of the coin plays a major role in its value. Like all coins, a 1979 D penny in excellent condition, without wear, scratches, or discoloration, will fetch a premium. Coins are graded based on their appearance, with mint state or MS grades being the most valuable. A 1979 D penny in MS 65 or higher condition can be worth several dollars, depending on the market. Some 1979 D pennies, especially those graded MS 67 or higher, have been sold for upwards of $10 to $15 or more in the collector's market. While that might not seem like a huge sum, keep in mind that these coins were only worth 1 cent when they were first minted. But here's where things get really interesting. Some 1979 D pennies are actually rare due to a striking error known as the double die obverse. This error occurs when the coin is struck multiple times during the minting process, causing the design elements to be slightly misaligned. The result is visible doubling on certain parts of the coin, such as the date or the lettering. Highlight the doubling on the 1979 D penny, with arrows pointing to the areas showing the error. Asterisk if you happen to have a 1979 D penny with noticeable doubling on the obverse, especially on the date 1979 or the word liberty, you may have a very valuable error coin on your hands. These double die obverse pennies can be worth significantly more, sometimes reaching hundreds of dollars in top condition. Some of the best examples of the 1979 D double die obverse penny have been sold for over $200 or more, depending on the condition and level of doubling. So, what about the 1979 D penny in today's world? While it's true that the penny has seen its purchasing power diminish over the decades, it's still a part of everyday life in the U.S. Even as some people argue for phasing out the penny, the 1979 D penny and its contemporaries still circulate and continue to be part of the coinage system. Today, a 1979 D penny is still worth 1 cent in most transactions. However, if you're a coin collector, a piece of history like this can be more than just pocket change. It can be a treasure. And for some, finding a rare error coin, like the 1979 D double die penny, is the thrill of a lifetime. As the years go by and inflation continues to push the value of the penny lower, we may wonder, what's the future of the 1 cent coin? Will the 1979 D penny become a relic of a bygone era? Or will collectors continue to seek out rare and unique versions, keeping the penny's legacy alive in the numismatic world? Scene: show modern coins, with the penny fading into the background as part of a collection. Asterisk while the future of the penny is uncertain, one thing is for sure. The 1979 D penny will always hold a special place in the hearts of coin collectors and history buffs alike. So there you have it, the 1979 D penny, a coin that represents both the past and the future of U.S. currency. While it may only be worth 1 cent in daily life, it has a fascinating history and could be worth much more to the right collector. If you've got any of these coins lying around, it might be time to take a closer look. Who knows, you could be holding a rare gem. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the 1979 D penny, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting coin history and valuable finds. Have you ever found a rare coin like this? Let me know in the comments below. You might think it's just another penny, but trust me, there's much more to it than meets the eye. Whether it's the rich history behind the penny, its intriguing design, or the surprising value it holds today, the 1979 1 cent coin has a lot to offer. So stay tuned as we explore its history, how much it's worth today, and why it could be worth more than just a cent. A montage showing key moments of 1979, including political, cultural, and economic highlights such as the energy crisis, pop culture, and the Reagan era. Asterisk let's rewind the clock to 1979, a year filled with historic moments and major changes. The world was dealing with an ongoing energy crisis, economic instability, and geopolitical shifts. In the U.S., President Jimmy Carter was in office, navigating a tough economy and rising inflation rates. Meanwhile, the pop culture scene was alive with the disco craze, movies like Apocalypse Now, and the rise of early 80s music. In the midst of this, the U.S. Mint was busy working to produce currency to meet the growing demands of an evolving economy. The 1979 1 cent coin, like every other year, was an essential part of everyday transactions. But this particular penny holds a special place in the history of American coins, thanks to its design and the economic context of its time. Let's take a closer look at the design of the 1979 1 cent coin. On the obverse, you'll find the well-known image of President Abraham Lincoln, which has been part of the penny since 1909. This iconic design was created by artist Victor David Brenner and remains one of the most recognized coin designs in history. On the reverse side, we see the Lincoln Memorial, designed by Frank Gasparo. This design has graced the penny since 1959 and was used up until 2009, when the U.S. Mint began introducing the Union Shield design on the reverse side of the penny. Now, let's talk about the composition of the 1979 penny. It was made of 95% copper and 5% zinc, much like many pennies minted before it. This copper composition was the norm until 1982, when the U.S. Mint switched to a copper-plated zinc composition to save on production costs. The 1979 penny, with its higher copper content, has become more valuable in terms of metal value over the years, especially as the price of copper has risen. To understand the 1979 penny's true value, it's important to look at the economic situation at the time. 1979 was a year of high inflation and economic uncertainty. The United States was still recovering from the 1970s oil crisis, which led to skyrocketing energy prices and a general increase in the cost of living. In fact, the inflation rate in 1979 was around 11%, making everyday goods more expensive. At the time, a penny could buy you more than it can today. For example, in 1979, the average price of a loaf of bread was around 86 cents, and a gallon of milk was about $1.30. While those prices seem low by today's standards, they were significant back then given the inflationary pressures of the time. So, what about the value of the 1979 penny today? Well, like most coins, its value depends on several factors: condition, rarity, and demand from collectors. In general, a standard 1979 penny in circulated condition is still worth only 1 cent. However, things get more interesting when you start looking at higher quality examples. If you happen to have a 1979 penny in excellent condition, graded MS-65 or higher by the Numismatic Guarantee Corporation, NGC, or the Professional Coin Grading Service, PCGS, you could be looking at a value of $1 to $3 or more, depending on market conditions. But this is still just the tip of the iceberg. Now, here's where things get really exciting for coin collectors. Some 1979 pennies have errors that can make them worth far more than a regular penny. These errors occurred during the minting process and resulted in unique coins with unusual characteristics. One of the most sought-after errors for the 1979 penny is the double die obverse variety. This error happens when the coin is struck multiple times, resulting in a doubling effect on the lettering or the date. The 1979 penny is one of the most well-known examples of this error. A 1979 double die penny in high-grade condition can fetch anywhere from $100 to $500 or even more, depending on the level of doubling and the coin's overall condition. These error coins are highly prized by collectors and can be a valuable find. While it may seem like the 1979 penny is a relic of the past, it's still very much a part of modern-day life. You might still find these pennies in circulation, tucked away in jars, or even being used in daily transactions. But given the high inflation and rising production costs, you might be wondering, how much longer will pennies be used in circulation? Despite the increasing costs of producing pennies, the 1979 penny, like many others, continues to be part of the fabric of American currency. But with ongoing debates about the future of the penny, it's hard to say how much longer these coins will remain in everyday circulation. While the 1979 penny continues to be used, the future of the 1-cent coin is uncertain. Over the years, there have been growing discussions about whether it's time to phase out the penny altogether. The cost of producing each penny exceeds its face value, and some argue that getting rid of the penny would save the U.S. Mint millions of dollars each year. Countries like Canada and Australia have already eliminated the 1-cent coin, while the U.S. continues to debate its fate. Whether or not the 1979 penny will become a collector's item in the future depends on what happens with the penny's continued circulation. Slow-motion footage of a 1979 penny spinning on a flat surface, gradually fading to the channel logo. Let's start by setting the stage. 1981 was a year of significant change in the United States. The country was under the leadership of President Ronald Reagan. The economy was shifting with the beginning of the 1980s recession, and pop culture was experiencing the rise of big music stars, new movie blockbusters, and the early days of video games. Amidst all this, the humble 1-cent coin was still a part of daily life for Americans. In 1981, the U.S. Mint continued to produce the classic copper-plated zinc penny with the familiar design of Abraham Lincoln on the obverse and the iconic Lincoln Memorial on the reverse. But while the design was familiar, the value of this penny would be influenced by a series of factors that you might not even realize. Let's take a closer look at the 1981 penny's design. On the obverse, you'll find Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, as featured on pennies since 1909. But here's the key detail. The penny minted in 1981 was struck in a composition of 95% copper and 5% zinc. This copper content was important, especially considering that a major change was looming just a few years away. Scene: a visual showing the transition in 1982. Just 1 year after the 1981 penny was struck, the U.S. Mint transitioned from the copper alloy composition to a copper-plated zinc one. This switch was driven by rising copper prices, which made it more expensive to produce the older copper pennies. So, 1981 remains one of the last years that the U.S. Mint produced pennies with a significant copper content. Now, while the penny itself might seem insignificant, let's consider its value during the early 1980s. In 1981, a penny still had some buying power. Back then, 1 cent could buy you a piece of candy, a stamp, or even a small item at the corner store. However, just a few years later, inflation would start to erode its purchasing power. Fast forward to today, and that same penny barely buys you anything. In fact, the cost to make a penny today exceeds its face value. The production of a single penny now costs about 2.5 cents due to rising costs of raw materials and manufacturing. So, why does the penny still exist in circulation? While most 1981 pennies are just worth, well, 1 cent, there are a few things that make certain 1981 pennies stand out in the world of coin collecting and numismatics. First, let's talk about the condition of the coin. Like all coins, the 1981 penny can be worth more than face value if it's in pristine condition. Collectors value pennies that are free from wear and tear, and those with sharp, clear details are always in demand. If you happen to have a 1981 penny in mint condition, it could fetch a few dollars, depending on its state. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Now, this is where things get really interesting. In 1981, the U.S. Mint produced pennies at 3 different mints: Philadelphia, which didn't use a mint mark, Denver, which had a D mint mark, and San Francisco, which used an S. The vast majority of 1981 pennies have the D mint mark, or no mint mark at all, indicating they were struck in Philadelphia. But here's where the value starts to shift. 1981 pennies that were struck at the San Francisco Mint, which are marked with an S, are rarer than their Denver counterparts. The 1981 S penny was produced in smaller numbers, and in higher grades these can be worth considerably more than their face value. A 1981 S penny in excellent condition, or in what's known as proof condition, can be worth anywhere from a couple of dollars to more, especially if you manage to find one in a high grade like MS-67 or higher. These coins are sought after by collectors and can fetch significant prices at auctions. While it's true that the 1 cent coin is largely viewed as outdated and inefficient in terms of purchasing power, the 1981 penny still plays a role in modern-day circulation. Even though its value has declined, it continues to be minted and circulated, albeit in small numbers compared to its heyday. Visual of the penny being used in transactions, such as buying a coffee or small item. Asterisk: despite the ongoing debates about retiring the penny, it still holds sentimental and historical value for many people. For some, collecting pennies from different years, especially those from the 1980s, has become a hobby. And for others, finding rare pennies like the 1981s in circulation can be a fun surprise. So, with all this talk of rarity and value, what does the future hold for the 1-cent coin? Well, while the penny is still circulating today, there are ongoing debates about whether it should be retired. Some argue that the penny is simply too costly to produce and that we're better off rounding prices to the nearest 5 cents. Show examples of other countries that have retired their 1-cent coin. Asterisk countries like Canada, Australia, and even the UK have already phased out their 1-cent coins, arguing that they've become more of a nuisance than a necessity. But for now, the penny remains a staple of US currency, and the 1981 penny continues to intrigue collectors and everyday coin enthusiasts alike. So, whether you have a 1981 penny sitting in your jar of spare change or you've stumbled across one in a coin collection, remember, it's more than just a tiny piece of copper. The 1981 penny holds a special place in the history of US currency, and certain versions of it could be worth more than you think. Thanks for joining me today as we explored the history, value, and future of the 1981 1-cent coin. If you have any 1981 pennies lying around, now you know a little bit more about them. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more fascinating deep dives into the world of coins and currency. And if you've got any rare pennies or cool stories, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. The mix of historical analysis and practical information will engage viewers while educating them on a fascinating topic. You might think that a penny from 1983 is just another everyday coin, but there's much more to it than meets the eye. From its history to its unique place in the US mint's production, and even its potential value today, the 1983 penny is far more interesting than you may realize. Stick around to discover why it could be worth much more than just 1 cent. Let's rewind the clock to 1983. The world was in the midst of an economic shift, with the US economy recovering from the 1980 to 1982 recession. President Ronald Reagan was in office, and the early 80s saw a major cultural boom, with new music, movies, and technology coming into the spotlight. At the same time, the US Mint was hard at work, producing coins like the 1-cent piece to keep up with the growing demand for currency. 1983 marked a year when the US was continuing its coin production, and the 1-cent coin was going through a significant shift. It was the year following a major change in the penny's composition, which we'll dive into in just a moment. So, while many people were focused on the economic, cultural, and political shifts of the time, the 1983 penny was quietly making its own mark in US history. Now, let's take a closer look at the design of the 1983 penny. Just like the pennies minted in the decades before it, the 1983 1-cent coin featured the well-known image of President Abraham Lincoln on the obverse, designed by Victor David Brenner. This iconic portrait of Lincoln has been the face of the penny since 1909, and it still is to this day. On the reverse side, you'll find the Lincoln Memorial, designed by Frank Gasparo. This reverse design had been in use since 1959 and would continue on the penny until 2009 when it was replaced by the Union Shield design. Let's talk about something that makes the 1983 penny particularly noteworthy: the change in its composition. You see, the US Mint made a significant shift in 1982, just before the 1983 penny was struck, transitioning from the copper alloy composition that had been used for centuries to a new formula of 97.5% zinc and just 2.5% copper. This change was driven by the rising cost of copper, which had made it increasingly expensive to mint pennies with the traditional copper composition. So, while the 1983 penny looks very similar to the pennies before it, it was made with a new, lighter, and cheaper material, copper-plated zinc. This change was a major shift in US coinage, as it made the production of pennies far less costly, though it also made them lighter and less valuable in terms of their metal content. Interestingly, Because of the high demand for copper and its rising price, pennies minted from 1983 and onward are worth more as scrap metal than their face value. But for coin collectors, there's more to the 1983 penny than just its composition. So, what makes the 1983 penny valuable today? Let's start with the basics. Most of the 1983 pennies are still just worth 1 cent. In fact, that's the case for nearly all coins minted in that year, even though they may have been in circulation for over 40 years. However, the value of a 1983 penny increases significantly if it's in pristine condition. Coins in mint state, graded as MS-65 or higher, can be worth several dollars, depending on the market. While that doesn't sound like a lot, it's still a premium compared to the face value of the coin. Coins in higher grades, like MS-67 or even MS-70, can fetch $10 or more, especially if they are part of a collector's set. But what really makes the 1983 penny exciting is a certain error that happened during its minting. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Some 1983 pennies were struck with a rare minting error, known as the double die obverse. This error occurs when the coin is struck multiple times, and the design elements become misaligned. As a result, certain parts of the coin, like the year and the word liberty, appear doubled. Double die pennies are among the most coveted by collectors, and the 1983 double die penny is no exception. These coins can command significant prices in the market, with well-preserved examples going for hundreds of dollars, depending on the extent of the doubling and the overall condition of the coin. Some of these rare era coins have sold for over $200 or more in high-grade condition, making them a valuable find for serious collectors. So, what about the 1983 penny in today's world? While the penny itself may seem like an outdated relic, it continues to be in circulation, albeit in smaller quantities compared to other coins. Even though the penny doesn't have much purchasing power anymore, it's still used in some transactions, and many people still collect them. The 1983 penny, despite being made of less expensive materials, has become a symbol of our currency system's evolution. And for those who collect, finding a 1983 penny, especially a high-quality or rare variety, can be a fun part of the hunt. While the 1983 penny is still in circulation today, there's been growing debate about the future of the 1 cent coin. As the cost to produce pennies continues to exceed their face value, some are questioning whether it's time to phase out the penny altogether, just like many other countries have done. Countries like Canada, Australia, and the UK have already phased out their 1 cent coins, arguing that they are more trouble than they're worth. The US has been debating this for years, but as of now, the penny remains a part of American currency. So there you have it, the 1983 penny, a coin that might seem simple at first glance, but holds a wealth of history, value, and even potential for collectors. While most of these pennies are worth just 1 cent, the rarer, well-preserved, and error-struck varieties can fetch much more. So, next time you come across a 1983 penny, take a closer look. It could be worth more than just a penny. Thanks for joining me today as we explored the history and value of the 1983 1 cent coin. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more fascinating coin history, tips, and valuable finds. Have you ever found a rare 1983 penny? Let me know in the comments below.